This is episode 6 of the Model Train Talk podcast, and I'm with my co-host RJ, and today we are interviewing Wally and George from GFW Trains. How you guys doing today?
Good.
Doing
good,
great. Doing great. How about you guys?
Good, thanks for asking. Again, thank you for coming on the podcast. Greatly appreciate it.
Our pleasure. Our pleasure. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, we'll be.
All right, so the first question is just, kind of get your information out there and help the viewer kind of understand where you're coming from. So when did the hobby, kind of first pique your interests?
So started. Well, for me mainly, it started when I was taken to a lot of train conventions and train shows. It's like a very little boy. I think my first train related meetup we did was, I think I was 2 weeks old. So we did we went to a trolley museum in Elgin, and I've just been going to train conventions, train shows since I was able to see the light of day. So I mean, that's basically where it all started for me.
So poor George was born into it. We're actually, you're seeing generation 2 and generation 3 of a model train family here. My dad was really, really big into model trains. And I started going to train shows with my dad as long as I can remember. I think I was 2 or 3 years old, going to shows all over the United States with him. He's an avid train collector, and I got into it and have been doing it my whole life. And George was just as I was born into it, George was born into it. So it's a generational thing in our family.
That's very cool. Yeah, that's really cool. So I guess one of my other questions is for you guys, what was your first train set, and why did it kind of pique your interests?
So, well, my first train set was the L-scale Thompson train set. That was the first gen. Actually, no, it wasn't. It's the first gen with the fast track. That was my first train set. But my first train was a post-war Chesapeake and Ohio 624 switcher. But that was my very first train. Then my first train set was the Thomas set. But of course, I had already accumulated like a bunch of stuff before I'd gotten the Thomas set. So I mean, I'd like to. When somebody asks me that, I just say my first train, which is the 624.
You can see that behind us, right over here on the ramp behind us.
Oh yeah, right back there.
Okay, yeah, I see that in the back. Yeah.
And my first one was it was an MPC Alco. It was a Lakeshore Limited Amtrak set. Came with an Amtrak Alco and 3 of the little 027 passenger cars. Love that set to death. I got that for Christmas. I think I was 3 or 4 years old. Santa Claus brought it for me. Santa's always bringing
Yep.
stuff.
Santa Claus never fails.
Exactly.
All right, RJ, you got any questions you would like to ask as well?
So was there a specific moment where you knew that model railroading would be a passion that you would have for your entire life or just for a very long period in your life?
Not really. I mean, honestly, when I was really little, I thought model railroading was kind of something that everybody did. I thought it was normal. I mean, I thought because we'd go to people's houses, and everybody that we went over to their house had a train layout in their basement. And not till I started going to school and stuff like that, I realized, wait a minute, this isn't a common thing. So I mean, I don't know. It's kind of just happened. I mean, there hasn't really ever been a moment where it's always been a thing. It's never been something where I've wanted to not do it, So, I mean, I guess that's
a funny way to put it, George. Because it's true. It was like both of us were kind of born into it, And I think it was a long time into our lives where we both realized, hey, wait a second, not everybody has a train layout in their basement. But for me, it's been like I said, I'm second generation, and my father took me to all of these shows. And when I was growing up, for the longest time, I was the youngest guy at the shows. I know you guys know the feeling, and a lot of the people that are watching this know the feeling where you show up at the show, and there are guys that are the next youngest guy is 25 years older than you are, and you're 20 minus 25 years, and that's you, and that's kind of the age span, and that's the way it was for me. And I belong to a group called the Train Collectors Association, and we have a really, really robust division of the Train Collectors Association here in the Chicagoland area called the Midwest Division of the Train Collectors Association. And I actually became involved with the leadership of the Train Collectors Association at a really early age, and have served as president for 3 times. When George was born, I was the serving president of the division. And I think the time when it was there, but I think that the time when it really set on me was when I realized that now there was somebody younger than me, and I had to show them the hobby the way that I was shown. And part of that clicked seeing the way that my son reacted to the hobby, at a young age. And I really like that.
Would you mind kind of talking about more of the experience of coming into TCA at a very young age, and kind of once you were a little bit older, you had to show other people the way. Can you just kind of talk about that a little more? Because I feel like a lot of viewers on here are at a very young age, and they're just kind of trying to find their right place. And can you just talk about that a little more?
Sure. Well, the dynamic of the hobby has kind of changed a lot. When I first started going to train shows, I went with my father, and my father was a collector. He's a train collector, and he has got a magnificent train collection with just about, you probably will think I'm lying when I tell you this, but I think that he has just about every piece of post-war train that's out there. And I've helped him collect it over the past 40 years. It's something that we've done as a father and son bonding. But when we first started going, it was very much a collecting organization, as opposed, the model train scene, at least with O-gauge trains, was very much a collecting scene as opposed to an operating scene. In fact, at the time, most of the better trains were trains that were produced 30 years previous to that. It was the MPC era, and while they were producing trains, stuff from the post-war era was much nicer trains. And I think over the years that's changed, where the collecting has shifted to more of an operating. And the way that I've always thought about it is, so you guys are generation 1 or generation 3. I'm generation 2. My dad's generation is generation 1. Okay, at least in terms of O-scale trains. I'm sure there was ones before them, but when George's grandfather, my father, was growing up, trains was the coolest toy to have. That was the thing. Everybody had trains, and it was the top of the line toy. It was the thing that everybody wanted to have. But over the years, trains went from being something that was not necessarily the top of the line toy. Next thing came in was slot cars, and then after slot cars, there was something else, and video games, and so on and so forth as it progressed. And by the time that I came along, I never really experienced, when I was a youth, trains being or at least O-gauge trains being a modeled aspect where trains were cutting edge, where it was cutting edge technology.
And if you think about it too, his generation was more secluded than our generation, because they didn't have the internet to meet other people our age and to talk trains with. Their train buddies were parents of other collectors that they hung out with at train shows. They were more local people. Where I'm sure there were other people that were into trains, they just never got a chance to bond because they couldn't.
We were separated.
Yeah. And that's another way to put it.
Sure. And I think the coolness then now is that's kind of looped back around, where the technology is there, where model O-gauge trains are cutting edge technology. Somebody that is in this generation 3, like you guys, the trains that are available it's cutting edge stuff. The smoke, the command systems, the sounds, it's all just cutting edge. And that's something that draws people in. And here was kind of to George's point, one of the things that was hard for generation 2, my generation, is when I was younger, they were collectibles. These are things to be collected, displayed, and not to be operated and touched. And I think that there is a kind of, I hate to say it, there's almost a missing generation, which is my generation. And I almost feel an obligation to try and loop as many people like you, George, RJ, to the passion of the hobby. And that's why it's really cool that you guys are doing this and reaching out and being able to coalesce the hobby, because it's something that is sorely needed. Again, to George's point, I mean, the technology is there now where you guys can all share ideas and coalesce and memorialize things, just like what you say that is a mission statement for what you'd like to do, which is really cool.
Thank you.
I mean, before this podcast, I had been in model railroading since I was 5 years old. I got my first model train. And I probably had never talked to anybody, whether online or in person, that also had model trains, just because nobody my age around here has them. Maybe they put them around the Christmas tree. And then Sam invited me on to do his podcast. And now, Sam and I are talking about model trains. And I've met Steve. Steve, I didn't even know. He lives 2 towns over from me. And now I get to talk to him, and I'm able to go and see his layout. And I'd never seen anybody's own personal layout before. And even Corey, and now I'm talking with you guys. It's just a real nice thing that we're able to now, trying to form this community of model railroaders.
I love it. And I'm so glad that there is a group of guys like yourself that feel empowered to do that too. Thumbs up to you guys.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's just kind of a passion for me. I just like to help people. And if I'm able to do that in some way involving trains, it means a lot to me personally. And so I guess another topic, you guys were talking about, the switch between collecting and operating.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of interesting you say that, because when I, talk to Steve, he has a lot of stuff that he's just collected. He hasn't really run it.
Right.
He hasn't really done much with it. He just collects. And same thing with my grandfather. He collected a lot of stuff and just had a certain trains that he ran, and everything else was on a shelf or in a box, never touched. And now it's like my generation and stuff like that, like we get to play with these engines now, and it's more, I guess, interactive, you could say. Would you agree?
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things where we appreciate the collectibles kind of stuff, but I mean, it's always been that thing that, you've been told not to touch, at the top of the shelf. And,
Yeah.
I mean, it's cool and all, but I personally enjoy the operating aspect of trains more than the collecting, just because, I mean, you get to play with them, it's the reason why they're called toy trains,
Agreed. And I think, though, that one of the things that I really think is cool about you 3 young men that are on here is that I'm not discounting that at all. And I think that that's probably the hook for all of you. But all of you, too, and this is something that from my viewpoint, I also think that there's a secondary appreciation for all of that stuff, too. That you guys have developed and appreciate, there's appreciation on both sides. It's not just like I'm an operator. You guys will look up and, oh my gosh, 671 turbine, how cool is this? Or look, I just got this Lionel Prairie from the antique store. Can you believe I just found this?
I mean, I don't know about RJ, but for me personally, when I started getting into the hobby and stuff, a lot of it was just to operate. But as I've kind of matured and grown up, I really appreciate at least the post-war Lionel, for that matter. I mean, I appreciate all of it, obviously, but I like history a lot, and Lionel post-war has a lot of history with it. And so I've been, I guess, leaning more towards the collector's spectrum of keeping things and putting them on the shelf. I've started to get really particular about what actually is run and what is put on the shelf. I don't know about you, RJ. How do you feel? Where do you lean?
I play with all of my trains. So I touched on this briefly in the original podcast where Sam interviewed me, but my first introduction to model trains was the I Love Toy Train series. And there they would, crash and, have fun with the old post-war trains.
Oh no.
Which I always had this fascination with the older post-war Lionel stuff. And my first train set was actually a MTH Santa Fe Super Chief. Just because I loved the Lionel post-war version. And eventually I just get a Lionel ready to run starter sets. But now that I have a little bit more disposable income, I'm finally starting to build my post-war collection and returning to the, original stuff that got me into this hobby in the first place.
And I think I'm the same way with you. I appreciate the post-war kind of stuff, but for example, I've got this post-war piece that was given to me by my grandfather, and I've heard that it's a highly, collectible piece, but I don't care what he says or my grandfather says. I'm going to run it,
Yeah.
You can't just and I like to collect more of the stuff that you can run, that runs well, and I appreciate the rarity of the other stuff, but why spend a lot of money on something that it's just going to sit on a shelf,
I mean, that's a very valid point for that side of the spectrum. I guess for me and collecting, it's just kind of like, I don't know, it has a lot of potential value and it has a lot of history with it. And I'm very clumsy, so I might trip and fall and it might break. And I'm just kind of scared of that. So, I always get out, all the trains that I even display too, I get them out and run them sometimes, but I run a lot more trains, like a select few trains more than others. But yeah, it's kind of interesting how we all have different views of like, I'm going to run a train no matter what, or, I kind of understand where this train is coming from and I'm just going to very carefully run it every once in a while. It's just kind of interesting to see all that in different perspectives. RJ, do you have any more questions for these guys before we move on to a different topic?
So I was just wondering, what was your inspiration behind starting your YouTube channel? You guys are really popular amongst the train community, over 1,000 subscribers, one of the few model railroading channels that have reached that mark. So was it this passion of like trying to pass it on to the next generation that sparked it, or was it something else that sparked the YouTube channel?
This is going to sound really funny, but I started it because of Thomas, the wooden railway kind of stuff. I was that weird 9-year-old kid with the Thomas train set up on his kitchen table. And there's the first GFW train. Well, originally I created the channel, and there's a guy in our train club. He was the next youngest person besides me, and his name is Tim Fron, and he's got a YouTube channel that was called TDF Lines. And I had started the channel and I named it GFW Trains. So, if you can just see it was originally like Thomas stuff, and then I kind of just started making stuff on like model railroading, and it was basically just like for whatever, and then as I got older, I kind of just got out of the Thomas stuff, and I started playing with this stuff more. I had always played with the O gauge stuff, but I really started to focus on, the O scale. And I think then I had made videos here and there until, he wanted to start a channel called Train Buds with me, my dad, and my grandfather talking about O scale trains. And he'll tell you that I didn't want to do it, but I was interested in it, and I guess it never really happened until and we started using my channel because by then I think I had about 300 subscribers already, and he started making really good videos, and we just posted them on my channel, and that's kind of how it happened. And we're really hoping once this the whole stay-at-home thing is lifted and everything's safe again, we'll incorporate my grandfather into a lot of this too. That's kind of how it started. Yeah.
George was the inspiration. I got to tell you that. As YouTube started to crescendo to be something big, I thought to myself, I'd like to start a YouTube channel on something. And I thought, I was like, I love canoeing. So my first thought was maybe I'll do a YouTube channel on canoeing. And I thought, well, I think at the peak, if I started a YouTube channel on canoeing, I could get the 5 people in the United States that cared about it. And that would be it when it would max out. So then I started thinking, I was like, well, trains. We do so much cool stuff that in trains. Why don't we do a train YouTube channel? And I had this idea of train buds with my dad, my son, and I doing something. And I pitched it to my son. He claims this isn't it, but I swear it was this. He looked at me like, Dad, I'm already doing that. What are you thinking? And then it clicked. I'm not the smartest guy around. And then it clicked with me. I was like, oh, yeah, you do have one of those. So then we just kind of poured ideas and resources and everything like that into the GFW Trains channel with George, and making George is kind of the face of the channel, and I enjoy the production end of things, but it's also a great excuse for us to incorporate the train hobby and do it in a father-son sense, or even a 3-generational sense: grandpa, father, son.
Yeah, that's a very good point. That's kind of why I had you guys on the podcast today. Just kind of seeing that perspective and stuff like that.
So you guys talk about how George's grandfather, your father, collected post-war, and then you were into trains, in the MPC era, and now we're in the modern era. So in today, is there like one particular group that you try to collect and operate the most, or is it just, oh, that's a nice MPC locomotive, that's a nice post-war piece of rolling stock, and you'll pick it up?
Well, I personally, I've like it all. I really do. Like when I go to a train show, my eyes first go to the post-war stuff, because that's kind of like what my dad will literally tell you if he ever talks about me. He's like, yeah, I trained my son good. He's like my hunting dog. I bring him to a train show, and he goes out and finds me trains.
Literally, and there are stories that he tells. Like there'll be this like post-war boxcar in the cabinet, right? And he'll point to it and tell somebody that, like, when he was 10 years old, my grandpa was in a conversation with somebody. My dad saw this boxcar, and he was like, tugging on his dad's shoulder to go and buy it. And he got mad at him for doing that. But then when he found out why he was doing it, he was like, wait, whoa.
So I like that stuff. And then the other thing too, George has really sucked me into all of not necessarily, it was an easy job, a lot of the more modern stuff, with all of literally the bells and the whistles and the scale and everything like that. But I know that all 3 of you know, like when you're sitting in the car with your parents and they tune the radio station to like some really garbagey music, and you're like, I can't believe my parents listen to this stuff. That's the way I am about MPC, man. That's what I grew up with. I know that stuff too. And that's like, oh gosh, yeah. That Bison. So funny story is, and I don't even think I told you this, Sam, is that when I had you on my on the GFW Trains live stream, you're showing your collection, and you zoom by one thing, and it was one that I always wanted. I was like, oh my God, Sam's got it.
I think I know what it is. Is it the TCA Bicentennial Special?
Yes. Yeah.
I knew it. Yeah. I guess. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I laugh at that, because that was one. I think if you would have, that you had some other cool things, some really cool stuff. The Mikado that you had and everything like that. But I think that if you said, Wally, which piece would you want in my collection? I'd be like, yeah. That one.
Yeah. Funny story about that. At my local train club, or not my train club, train store, which unfortunately went out of business. But it was basically a warehouse just filled with trains. You can go through boxes of like new inventory and literally just trains everywhere. And so there was a plastic, that white plastic fold table that you see at like parties and stuff, and it had trains all over it. It was dusty, it was dirty, and so it's kind of in the back corner of like the store. And so I went past it a couple times. I saw the train, didn't think much of it. But, since my mom's dad collected, my mom kind of knows a little bit more than the average person does about trains. And she really understands like the value and stuff like that. And so she came over and she's like, you need to get this one. And I was like, why? Like, I was like, when I first got in the hobby, like I was very tunnel vision. I really knew what I was looking for. And if I didn't find it, I wasn't going to get anything. But now I'm like really like everywhere. But I was just like, I don't know what this is. And she's telling me about it and how it's like TCA Bicentennial Special, and how they released it like only I think 1 year, right? And, it had 3 passenger cars, and there was another set with like the 13 box cars with all the original colonies, and she was like, you need to get it, and I was like, I looked at it and I was like, I'm interested. It was kind of cool. Like I've never seen a train like that in red, white, and blue paint scheme.
Right.
And I was like, I need a passenger car set anyways. And I thought it would look pretty good. So I put it on the test track and I was like, I'll take it. So I brought it home, dusted it up. It didn't have a light bulb. The light was burned out. So I replaced it and lubed it up and, kind of maintained it and everything. And now it runs so good. Like it's so even along all the tracks with like the power and stuff. It runs really well. Great find. Thanks to my mom.
Yeah. You got one up on me. I've never run one.
It's probably I'm very grateful to have it and found it. I realized I did some research later. I'm actually doing a historical series video on it. Me and Steven, and Steven actually helped me find some research because it was very hard to find. But I'm making a video about it. I don't have a deadline for it yet. But yeah, it was very exciting to get, and it was probably like my 3rd engine in my collection. I had what did I have? I had the Hogwarts Express set. I had a starter set, UP switcher, New York Central GP7, and that was like my 4th engine. So yeah, but it was a cool find. So now I know, and whenever I come over to your guys' house, I'll make sure to bring it.
Right. I need to get run number 1 on that bicentennial set.
And that's one of those things too. Is like, Tyco. They created that engine, and they produced like so many of them. But like, you don't see that no scale. Lionel is the only company I've ever seen somebody make something like that in the red, white, and blue since like
the bicentennial,
the recent era of like since like 2015. I mean, I haven't seen anything since like the presidential train or the freedom train.
Yeah, so that one strikes a chord with me. So to loop back around on that question, I like that song that was from your parents' youth that you're listening to in the car because you're forced to listen to it. You're like, why do they like this stuff? There is some good to it there.
It is. Yeah. Any questions that you have, RJ, that you would like to ask?
I can't think of one right now, but I think you have one.
Yeah. So I guess kind of moving on, you guys recently visited a post-war, I guess kind of going with that post-war and NPC area theme. I saw the video on your channel. I'll link it in the description of the podcast. You guys visited a post-war train store?
Yeah. So there's this train store in Missouri that when we went to the what year convention was it? There's a TCA convention in St. Louis, and we had I was really little, but we had the buy and sell part was already over, and I was craving some trains, so we went over to that Train Town. And we had looked around. I didn't really understand anything in there because I was really little. So I think I got like an HO like Athearn Blue Box engine, and that was it. I think my grandpa got something else, but we came back, and I was thinking it would be filled with like HO stuff. And we go in, and I'm just like, holy moly, and it was just filled with not HO, post-war O-scale Lionel trains, and it was like, I mean, to think that all the stuff in that shop, you'd have to think of like the person who owns it, his collection, I mean, there was some pretty neat stuff in there, and man, this is one of a kind stuff, it's stuff you rarely ever see.
Well, it's kind of neat. The store's called Train Town, and it's in Rock Hill, Missouri, which is just outside of St. Louis. And there's two brothers that run the store, but I believe it's a family store. Bob and John are their names, and they specialize in post-war. And the store it's all stocked with beautiful post-war trains from floor to ceiling, and they have so many neat things from diesel units to steam engines to 60. I mean, they had 64 box cars lined up for sale, like you were walking through Walmart, and they were all brand new in the box. And it was just really a really neat train store to take in. And not only that, but it was kind of like what you would expect in like kind of an old-timey train store, I think, too.
Like from the 50s,
So in the front, they have the trains, right? And then in the back, they had all of these guys that were all just kind of Gen 1. I'm gonna call them Gen 1 train guys. So I'm Gen 2, you guys are Gen 3. So they're all Gen 1 train guys in the back, and they're all, to wire up this way and do that. Oh, yeah, we're going to do it like that. Fixing trains.
And I mean, they're not even they're just friends of the owners.
Right,
too.
right.
They just came over there because their wives were out of the house and they were just, craving to talk to trains, doing work on something that the owners didn't know how to fix. They're just talking about trains, telling everybody that came into the shop about the glory days of trains, that kind of stuff.
But it was neat. It's neat to see not only that inventory, because it's not something that you see every day when you walk into a train store. A train store where the inventory, the bulk of their inventory is all post-war and pre-war Lionel.
And I mean, it's not that yes, but they also had a good variety of modern stuff too. I mean, it wasn't all just post-war. So, and the stuff they had modern-wise was a lot of it was used, but it was good prices. It wasn't stuff where they were ripping you off or anything. I mean, it was all from the second-hand market, but you'd think it's new because
well cared for.
Yeah. And they had everything you needed to get into the hobby, as well as everything you needed if you were an expert in the hobby. So it's just kind of one of those cool shops.
Yeah, it was really neat. And I like to kind of touch back on something that we've talked about earlier in the podcast. I really think that it's important for all of these generations to connect up. Generation 1, those guys; Generation 2, my group; and Generation 3, you guys. And just there was a train store. I don't know if either of you have ever heard of it. Called Madison Hardware, and it was in New York City, and it's almost legendary now. It was a train store that was open for years, and the two brothers that owned the store had a special relationship with the Lionel Corporation, and Lionel would give them all kinds of different things that weren't necessarily offered to other hobby stores, and it was just a small store. And I hear stories from all of these guys. From the first generation, the Gen 1 guys, they going to this store with the two brothers, and they were just pulling trains out of anywhere. You'd ask for a train, even a rare one, and they'd walk in the back and come out with it, but that store is no longer here. It's gone. And I hear stories of that from the guys that had been to that particular store in New York City and made trips, special pilgrimage to Madison Hardware. And I kind of got that feel. It's totally different, but I got that same feeling from this store, almost like it was a blast from the past and a relic that really needed to be taken in and shared.
Yeah, the Train World, they have a store on Long Island called Train Land, and still to this day when I walk in there, they have O-scale trains on shelves, like Glenn Snyder display system, from the floor to the ceiling, and you could just stand looking up at the ceiling, looking at and just that feeling. But in times like this, especially after this whole virus stuff, it's really important for everybody in the hobby to go out there and support their local hobby shops. I know here on Long Island, probably 10 years ago, we had close to a dozen hobby stores, train sellers. And I could, as of, January before the coronavirus, Long Island was down to 3. And now because of this virus, we're going to be knocked down to 1. Nassau Hobby Center in Freeport. It seems like Trainland's going to end up closing. Train World's going to close their location on Long Island. But yeah, even if it's an hour drive or whatever, I'd suggest everybody out there just going and taking a trip to your local hobby store and picking something up to help them out.
You make a great point. Great point. We got to be stewards of the hobby, so otherwise it's just not going to be around. And that's a great point.
That's one of the reasons why I started this podcast, and now I'm bringing other people with me because we want to preserve everyone's story. I mean, worst case scenario, if we go under, and stuff like that. Even with MTH going out next year, that's kind of sent shockwaves to the community, I guess. And so I think it's becoming more and more important of kind of what you guys are doing with your live stream, and just kind of interacting with everybody and keeping our spirits up and kind of supporting each other.
And I think that the whole thing with MTH is awful, but I don't think that it's gonna, honestly, in my mind, I don't think it's gonna affect anything like in the train modeling community that much. I mean, if you think about it, there are quite a bit of people that are still interested in model trains, and they still have the power to start their own company or use stuff that's from. I mean, like it's such a strong. I mean, it's not as strong as like baseball card collecting, but if you think about it, it's like there is a strong following for model trains, and I don't think that people will let it die that easily.
So I'm thinking that there's going to be an STH or an RJTH maybe one of these days. You guys catch that little joke? Dad joke. I'm sorry, dad joke.
Well, that's how MTH was started because back in the day, Mike Wolf, he owned a hobby store, and he was fed up with the quality that Lionel was putting out with their models. And he said, well, I could do a better job than this. And then he went out there and arguably did a better job, and he pushed Lionel to these modern trains that we have now.
Right. And so, one of the things that I bring up sometimes, and I haven't had a chance to talk with you, and I hope, RJ, and I hope that one day that George and I can have a chance to have you on GFW Trains live stream. But I talked with Sam a little bit about this, and I kind of one of the things that I touched on when we first started. It's really cool to see people from your generation interested in doing this, and you bring a different. Your brains are programmed different than mine, and that's all right. I'm not saying it's right or it's wrong, but they're programmed different, in terms of the way that you interact in the community and the way that you perceive things and everything like that. And one of the things that Sam brought up when he was on the GFW Trains live stream was something that my head doesn't wrap around really quickly, but yours can, because you live in the generation that's incorporated this into your lifestyle. How once you guys know that those other people, like-minded train individuals are out there, it's much easier for you guys to coalesce, even though you're around the country. Mm-hmm. If there's one challenge that I can give you three and anybody else that might be out here, I mean, people are out there, and you guys have the knowledge and the ability that most of the guys in Generation 1, and not very many guys in Generation 2 know how to do that, but you guys can. And I think that I hope that by doing this, that you feel empowered to try and bring that network together of people who like trains, whether it's collecting trains, whether it's operating trains, whether it's rail fanning, whatever. Just bring them all together, because they're it's all just one group, and you're out there.
And I think if you think about it too, if you're involved in model trains, I mean, unless you got like all the money in the world, which goes with the point I'm talking about. I mean, you have something to bring to the table, when it comes to, like, I guess per se a dying hobby. And if it, like for example, you have to know how to like wire stuff, but like woodwork, and all that stuff. And if you don't, you are particularly strong in one aspect of the hobby, and I know other people are different parts. So if you come together, it kind of makes like
Right. No,
yeah.
no. I mean,
Yeah, I definitely
you
agree.
might know bench work and woodworking, but you don't know how to operate the electronics of a DCS, MTH DCS system.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Yep. I definitely agree with you there. I'm trying to think of what else I was going to say. I mean, kind of going with the generation and all that different stuff. Again, that's why we're doing this podcast. We're opening up the door of possibilities for everybody to connect and come together, especially during a time like this. I mean, I literally DM'd RJ and Corey, I think on Facebook maybe, and was like, "You guys down to do a podcast? Like, I've never done one before. You just want to do it?" And they were like, "Yeah, sure." So we did it, and we talked for about 2 hours afterwards. And then I got RJ's number, and we've been texting ever since about trains. And I'm sure if it wasn't on the subject of trains, it would go a lot differently, right?
Yeah.
And that's really cool. And I have to tell you, all right, so that's one side of the mirror, right? And from the other side of the mirror is me, where I've seen this. I've watched your guys' channels. I've seen your videos, RJ. I've seen your podcast, Sam, and it's very inspiring for me as somebody that's been a model train enthusiast, my whole life, and kind of from times seen it as a dying hobby, and it's really a breath of fresh air to see young men like yourself, really, the Gen 3 guys, as I keep calling you guys, really embrace the hobby, and I've seen that through mediums that I didn't even know existed 3 months ago. And my generation, my dad's generation, they want to do it at this point. I think that a lot of us see many of the things about the hobby kind of withering up and dying, that there isn't the demand out there for MTH to continue. The hobby shops on Long Island are they're shrinking and shrinking, and for people like myself, for people like my father, for people like Stephen, it's kind of scary. I mean, it truly is kind of scary, and all of us want to see this thing that we love continue, and I can't say enough how cool it is for you guys. And if there's any takeaway that I could give to you three and anybody else that's watching this, is to challenge to please carry that torch. Use these mediums that that you guys have and are familiar with to further the hobby. That and again, I mean, shoot, I don't know how to Twitter. Is that what you call it, George?
Tweet, Twitter, whatever. I don't.
Maybe I'll put it on the Insta chat. All right, more dad jokes. I'll leave it at that. But anyway, there are means of communications that you guys do, that you guys know, and the love of the hobby that you all share. And my challenge is to all of you is to coalesce as a group, because you're out there and you all know, and I guarantee all three of you guys right here, you all know how cool it is when you find somebody your age that's like-minded and you can sit down and talk trains and talk about So.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah,
definitely.
you guys know. I mean, I know you know that, and I know that there are a lot of other people that are out there that are like that. And again, that's my challenge. My challenge to you guys.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it. I'm sure RJ does as well. When I thought of this idea, I was just kind of like, I like trains. I like the YouTube videos because I was on a lone island by myself, kind of like I talked in the live stream. I was just kind of by myself. So I made a YouTube channel. It's okay. It's pretty cool, but it's just like it needs something new, something fresh, like that fresh breath of air that you were talking about. And I was just like, well, I don't see very many train podcasts. So I'm kind of doing my research. There's a couple out there, and it's just like there's not one, or at least to my knowledge, there's not one that and goes out of their comfort zone to DM somebody they've never met before and be like, "Hey, do you want to talk trains?" And then going from there, after you do the podcast, you make a personal connection with somebody like across the United States, across the world, and it just really brings people together. RJ, do you have anything to add on that topic?
I mean, I touched on it earlier, but before you really reached out to me, I went 20 years of my life without knowing anybody else my age, or really anybody else for that matter, who was into model trains. I mean, I had another YouTube channel a while ago, and I sort of had another model train friend, but really now, even if it's just a handful of us that are communicating back and forth, it's really nice to have that community of people like-minded as you, has the same interest as you, because I certainly haven't had that for most of my life. Usually it's my parents or my girlfriend who hear me rant about.
Yep. I would agree. It's just bringing in that fresh air. And another reason, like I talked about earlier, this podcast is for those people who are on the lone island by themselves, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I see so many social media accounts, so many YouTube channels where they have like 10 subscribers, and it's really cool, like their trains and everything. For an example, I don't know, RJ, if you have seen any examples of this, but one of them I believe is Ben's Trains. He has like a 4x8 layout with like 2 or 3 loops, and he just runs post-war. And it's just so cool to me that a kid that age is already into post-war and stuff like that. To me personally,
What collection he does,
Right.
did you have him on your live stream by chance?
Yeah, we
We
have
did.
him on our live stream.
Yep. That's who I'm talking about. He's very cool. I kind of, there's just so many people out there I want to learn their stories. And so
He's one of those guys too, where similar to you, what you guys are saying, where you guys talk. I mean, I talk to him on a regular basis. It's pretty cool. Him and I've talked to Corey a lot. It's really cool just to connect with a lot of people through trains. But
yeah, very cool. Anything else you guys want to add? Any closing thoughts? RJ, do you have anything more you would like to ask?
I think we've had a really good conversation tonight. I want to thank you guys for coming on. This was a great conversation to have tonight.
Definitely.
yeah, we had a fun time.
Yeah, it's really cool. I appreciate you having us on. I can tell you from my perspective, it's really inspiring to see the next generation of people that really have a passion for the hobby and have a passion for trains, communicating and sharing that passion and bringing their corner of the community together. So hats off to you guys for doing that.
Thank you. And hats off to you for your live stream show. I think a lot of people like that. A lot of people enjoy it. I will link your channel in the description below the podcast and stuff like that. So any other closing thoughts before we wrap things up?
Just I'll say it now. I said it before. I'll say it again. I really would like to issue a challenge to all of you guys that are in the third generation of train lovers per se, is to you guys have the avenues that you can connect in ways that my generation, my father's generation, can't even wrap our heads around. You guys utilize those things and come together because you're out there, and it's really important, if this is something that you love, to keep further in that hobby, and then too, for those of you that are doing it, I really appreciate that, and I really appreciate the fact that people like yourself are empowering others to do that as well.
Anything you would like to add, RJ?
Nope.
Okay. I'm challenging you guys, RJ, all the viewers out there, do something different, do something that has never been done before, get that fresh breath of air. Um, that's my words of inspiration to anybody watching this. So again, thank you guys for coming on. Greatly appreciate it. I will link all the appropriate links in the description of this podcast below. And thank you, viewers, for watching the podcast. Please make sure to stick around for other podcasts coming out in the near future. And we all sign off. Have a good night, everybody. Take care, take care, RJ. Take care, GFW Trains, and we'll see you. Me and RJ will see you, the viewers, in the next podcast.